Okay, this is going to be kind of a hodgepodge of videos of the rebuild of my number 4 computer that we call Gamera. Gamera has an i7-6950X chip in it on an ASCII X99 EWS. It has 32 gigabytes of DDR4 3000 megahertz RAM, a G-Skill. We had already removed 3 of the 4 Titan X hybrids that we had put into this machine, and we're going to take out the 4th one now. Following this, we were going to go ahead and replace it with the 3200 DDR4 G-Skill RAM from another computer that we know was good, and attempted to boot it up, and we found that it really wasn't taking the 3200. It kept throwing an error loop, and we tried to reboot. So the decision was then that we would put the original RAM back into the computer since we knew that was working, and when we tried to do that, we actually had a failure of the motherboard to start up altogether. So the question was then, was it a bad motherboard, or was it something else? Now, this motherboard had always given me some problems in the past, so it was decided that it probably was the motherboard. Just go ahead and take out the motherboard and put a new motherboard in, and then we would proceed from that point. So what you're going to see us doing right now is we're just going to go ahead and start to remove all the RAM off of this board, and then we're going to disconnect the CPU cooler and then take the whole motherboard out and proceed from that point forward. I've removed several minutes from this clip just because it's monotonous to look at. There's not really much going on. The angle's not giving you a good view of what we're doing inside the computer. You can kind of see a little bit of the motherboard from here. These particular motherboards tend to be extended ones. They just fit inside this case. I'm removing right now what is a power supply to the PCI slots. It's basically a 6-pin, which is being powered by 2 Molexes. At the top of the motherboard, just above the CPU, are 2 8-pin supplementary power supplies, as well as the 24-pin on the side for the motherboard. And it's a little tough to get these things out of there, but once we did, it moved along fairly quickly. What you're seeing me now do is removing the 24-pin, and then we will attempt to remove the CPU cooler here in a minute. That there is just the little audio beep that is at the bottom of the motherboard that when it starts up, it gives us our beeps. And I think actually I borrowed that from another motherboard, just because ASCII really doesn't come with those. But we just went ahead and cannibalized an old motherboard for that piece. And he's just connecting the power supply to the pump on the CPU cooler, and then I'm starting to loosen pins on the CPU cooler itself, and then we'll get this thing out of there. I prefer the Corsair Corsair i100s. I've tried some of the newer models, and I'm not really happy with those, so I kind of picked up a couple of the older ones when they were new. I was getting rid of them, and so I have a couple of spares sitting around that we use for these builds. And then there, as you can see, we're removing the CPU cooler. My friend Ricardo is commenting about the thermal paste. It looks good. And then we're just going to go ahead and take the motherboard out here so we can get started on rebuilding this computer. Okay, what you're looking at now is my friend Rico. He's going to go ahead and clean off the CPU, so when we decide to remount this, we can just put some new thermal paste on there and we'll be good to go. And he's basically showing that he's going to be moving all of it. He's using a isopropyl alcohol swab that we got from the computer store, which is really nice. I know some people like to use coffee filters or they use different type of materials, but we just go ahead and get something that we get from the store. And it does a really nice job of removing all the thermal paste and cleaning the surfaces really well. So now what you're looking at is my friend Rico. He's getting a new ASCUS X99 EWS USB 3.1 that we're going to be using to replace the old motherboard in this computer. And he's going to go ahead and set it up on top of the case here. We're going to go ahead and test it outside of the case before we put it in, because as you know, once you put these things in there, it gets really tough to maneuver. So we're just going to go ahead and sit on the outside here. Going to have some difficulty trying to get the CPU in, because it's just going to take the old CPU out of the old motherboard. And then with these particular motherboards, as you try to set the CPU in, you have to look for the little diamond triangle, which is actually outside of where the CPU sits. So when you go to close the retention mount, you'll actually see the diamond on the outside. And that took me a little bit to figure that out. It took me a little bit to figure that out because we hadn't done this in a while. But there is a little plastic piece that is actually covering the top of the CPU socket. And to get that to pop out, you actually sit the CPU in first, and then you start to close the retention socket. And as you're locking in place, it actually forces that little piece of plastic to pop off. And that's what's going on right now, is my friend is trying to figure out how to get that plastic out of there. Like I said, it's always a relearning experience. Okay, what you can see here is you can see the little piece of plastic that's covering the CPU slot. And my friend Ricardo is about to get the CPU out of the old motherboard and move it over to the new one, so we can go ahead and get this placed in there. I've deleted most of the rest of the scenes following this because it's basically just pictures of his back for the next 10 minutes, so I think we're just going to go ahead and skip that for now. But what you're looking at in the foreground, though, is he's trying to show you the CPU and the lettering on it. Unfortunately, the camera was not focused in on it, so you can't really see it. And then now he's just trying to align it to the pyramid. Okay, so what we're doing here is I'm installing the DDR4 on the motherboard. We got the CPU already on, and we're just going to do it outside the case because it's easier to do than having to put it inside the case. Okay, and now what we're doing is we're going to go ahead and put the motherboard back inside the case. This is a little bit better because we realized now that the camera wasn't focused on us, so we moved the camera to get a better picture of the complete case and the motherboard we install. My friend Ricardo is basically talking about trying to line up all the screws, holes in the case, so we can go ahead and bolt this thing down. This is basically me just putting the screws into the case to make sure that we can get in position. And he's talking about doing opposite sides of the motherboard each time, so that way we get a good alignment of the holes. You can see all the DDR4 is ready installed and the CPU is there ready to go. We have the radiator at the top of the case. That is a 280 actually. And the next thing we're going to have to do here is make sure that we install all the power supplies correctly. Here we're basically talking about the connections for the USB and the wiring for the case. He's pointing out the different power supplies on the top of the motherboard for the CPU, the extra 2 8-pins. And now we're putting in the thermal paste. And we like to do a little X with dots in the spaces between them to make sure that we get a good seal. And now we're going to go ahead and remount this thing here. The argument about which way we should put the hoses, I told him I basically like it toward the side. Again, we're not doing too tightly, just basically a little bit tight until we get the whole thing locked down. And then we go back and make sure that it's secured. And then he's plugging it into the CPU fan header. And here we're just connecting the extra power supply to the top of the motherboard for the CPU, and he's plugging in the pin to the front of the case so that we can go ahead and power this thing up here. We're going to go ahead and install one Titan X Maxwell just so that we can boot up and get into the BIOS and see how this motherboard responds to our tampering with it. That right there was the 6-pin, and I'm just basically explaining to him about the different PCI slots. And here we are just installing one of the Titan X's so that we can get this thing started. Okay, now what we're doing here is basically explaining the different PCI slots, and he's going to go ahead and plug in a monitor here to the Titan X. I'm locking down the card into position, and then we will see if this motherboard will boot up. And it actually threw a fit when we initially started it up, because it had detected that we'd actually been inside the case and it was giving us a little bit of an error. But it cycled through and eventually decided it was going to go ahead and let us boot into the system. But it was a little touch and go there for a minute. It's cycling, it's giving us all the code errors. Yes, someone's going to point out that the GPU is not connected with the accessory power supply. There you go. A little bit of a rush to try to get this thing done, and we kind of forgot to plug in everything. That's alright. There's no harm. And then we'll retry this again. and it's gonna give us into the screen, and it's telling us that we've intruded into the case and it wants to rebuild, so we need to restart it. And now we got to the BIOS, so we were like, okay, great, we got to the BIOS. But then it's kind of sitting there looking at it going, doesn't like two of the DIMMs, two of the RAM. It just doesn't like it. And so we're saying, well, is it because the slot's bad on the motherboard, or is it because of the RAM itself? And actually, we knew that RAM was good since we just removed it from another computer. So we're going to power off and move the RAM about and see if we could get it to boot, and see if it just didn't like that RAM in those slots. So basically I'm just going to rotate the RAM around here and move them into different ones. Okay, and it is at this point, I wish I had more video to show you, but unfortunately the we ran out of time while filming. Turns out that we did try switching the RAM around and it didn't make a difference, so then we went ahead and just go ahead and try to boot it up to see what happens. We made it through one BIOS reset and went to the logon screen, at which point in time it just stopped working. So we tried it again and we couldn't get the computer to boot up at all. Thought maybe we can't just have another motherboard failure at this point in time. So we just started to try to disconnect everything and start from scratch. When we maneuvered this, we popped over on the side, and I looked at the power source. We tried to reboot, and that's when we noticed that the fan on the power source was not spinning up. So it turns out it wasn't a bad motherboard to begin with, and really didn't replace the first one. It was actually that the power source was actually failing. Luckily, one of my teammates, Jaybird, had an extra 1600 PSU, which he lent to me, and we were able to install that the next day, which I don't have any video of. It booted right up, went into Windows. We installed the rest of the GPUs onto that system, which is actually now a mix. It's two Titan X's with two 980 Ti's, and it's working fine. I haven't had any problems with it. What you're looking at right now is that computer. You can see its name is Gamera. You can see there are two, well, you can't really tell because you can't see the EVGA Precision X, but basically there's two Titan X's and two 980 Ti's in there. They're running fine. This is a project we call Einstein, basically doing gamma ray searches. You're familiar with the Civ 64X that I use on this system, and basically this is just how it runs. Again, sometimes you can go through these things and think you have it all figured out, and then it turns out to be one of the simplest things you don't even cross your mind. It was really, really weird because the computer would boot up, it just wouldn't come all the way up into the Windows. The motherboard was giving us power, it was saying it was there. It took us a while to go back and figure out that it was the PSU throwing us the error. And we already made the power source EVGA, and they sent us out a replacement. And once I got here, we threw that in, and it's been running fine since. So there you go. We have another build coming up here in probably the next week or so. That should be interesting to keep an eye out for it.